Hi, Gil. How you doing?
Great, how are you?
I am doing great. I understand it is extremely hot where you're at.
Not enough. I have some tea here to make it really hot, but yeah.
Ah, cool. If it gets too hot, I got this USB fan that I put in there. It's got some advertising from my former employer, but okay. Uh, so, Gil, I am looking forward to this, and we also have a couple of. I had a couple people saying they're excited to see your presentation coming up over here. So, without tell me a little bit where you located at, and tell us a little bit about what you do, and then we'll let you get started.
So I'm located in Israel, where it's currently very, 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 very hot. Um, I'm a trainer, I'm a consultant. I have a full slide on that saying my name, on all things software and testing and stuff like that. And today we're going to talk about something that is very related to that, testing web applications.
Excellent. I'm always into that. I've been doing that. I've been testing web applications for 24 years now, and I still have not gotten bored of it. So, Gil, if you share your screen, I'm going to turn it all over to you. And if there's anything I can find, any links or stuff, I'll be posting them. Everybody, remember, you can add questions to ask of Gil live. It's you can do it either from our LinkedIn event channel over there, or if you happen to end up over on the YouTube channel, you can do it from there. And with that, Gil, take it away.
Okay, so hi, I'm Gil. I'm one of these guys, really, but you'll have to just guess because I'm being masked there. So we're going to talk about aspects of web testing. Uh, Web testing, also that is doing this for like 20 years. Uh, I haven't been doing much of that. I've mostly been a backend guy and APIs and stuff like that. And so it was like I knew about Selenium and didn't touch it that much. But over the last couple of years, I've been more into that. And what I'm going to talk about today is it's not even what is web testing because everybody knows what is. But I think that when we're talking about uh, we're saying web testing, everybody means something else. So I'm going to cover a lot of that. So yeah, lots of Spider-Man going to be around here, except maybe me. So like I said, I'm a trainer and a consultant. I work with people, developers, testers, automators, wherever they are, um, regarding anything that makes software better. Everything around quality, testing, developer testing, um, web testing, that too. So if you want to see anything about my services and stuff like that, go to testingguild.com. There's also a YouTube channel when I do all kinds of webinars, and you'll find recordings there and short videos. That's enough promotion. Okay, so I'm going to show you my demo application for today, and we're going to discuss this in all kinds of aspects. So what you see here is Visual Studio Code. If you haven't met, thanks Microsoft for that. This is the application. It runs locally right now. It's a registration application. Basically, you have like 3 fields here and 2 checkboxes. And when it comes up, it comes like with 3 empty boxes. This one checked. I want to get promotions too. And this one is not checked. And you can't really press the register button, click on that, it will enable that, unclick or re-click, disable the button. If you try to register, if there's an error here, like everything's either missing or the email's doesn't look like an email, you get a nice error here. But if you try to actually do something that does work, like this, with .com at the end, because it needs to work. And you do this, you get a thank you page. like I said, a registration application. Let me go back to the slides. And the answer is, when you're thinking about it, does it really work? Because we kind of jump into all kinds of automation stuff like that. This is like a registration application. It should save my data. If I look at the page, what kind of, on the screen, what kind of things, apart from all the test cases that are, we'll talk about them, but the main thing here is that did it save the data? Now, there are clues there. The thank you page tells me my name, which is nice. But that's one aspect. I want to see that it actually works, save the data. I showed you something that when I clicked the register button, when everything was empty, I got the error thing. And one of the things that we need to think about when we're testing is we expect that if there was an error, nothing was saved, right? But maybe it was. So when we're talking about testing scenarios, we'll jump to automation later. Still thinking about testing options here. What really works is something that we need to define for ourselves. What is important here, and we can some of the things we can see on the screen, and some of the things we can't. So when we talk about web testing, and we're just thinking about clicking buttons and checking messages on the screen, it's not everything. So we probably want to keep that in mind when we're doing. So a bit more about this application. I told you this is like, I'll show the code in a minute. It's an Next.js application, front end with React, backend Node. Regular thing, the database runs locally. It's a JSON database. It saves the data in the JSON format. Let me show you the code a bit, how it looks like. What you see, let me go back to my main page here. So this is like the main page. This is its code, lots of events here. The whole thing here is a React component called registration. What else do I have? I can show you the thank you page is here. Thank you page is here. This is the code. If you can look at the code, by the way, you'll see that if I'm sending the name that you saw, Gil, yes, before that, as a query parameter, so it shows that. But there's another case that I didn't show you, that if you go to the thank you page, and without the name, you'll get something else. And this is another case that I'd like to check that it actually works. So this kind of starting to tell us a few things that if we just look at a web application like black box, all we see on the screen is everything that we see on the screen. But I gave you a bit more information. I gave you about the division of where the code sits. I told you about the React component, which we're going to talk about a bit more later. And I told you about the database study. This is a file database. This is where it saves the data. All you see here is automated tests results, but it doesn't matter. So if you wanted to test manually, by the way, you'll go to the database and see that the new information is there, right? Think about automation, we'll try to see something else. What else I did not mention is when you go back to the registration, when you do the register here, what happens is that it calls an API. The API is register, sends all the data that you've seen, that it gets saved into this JSON database. That's basically it. The error that appears here, all the interaction is part of the React component. and the only thing on the other on the page is the heading here, and sending the data through the API. So the React component doesn't save the data itself. It's interesting because we'll talk about that too. Okay, so I give you a bit more of information about that, and now we can talk about, okay, so we talk about different test cases. But with this kind of information, we know how the thing works, what it's built on, how the database looks like. The thing that it actually resides on my computer here, not somewhere in the cloud. We can think about a test plan. Now, when we're saying test plan, we're actually thinking about the list of cases and how we're going to test it. Let's separate those. The first thing that we're actually thinking about is what we're going to test. And this is our test plan. So that test plan basically is a list of test cases, hopefully prioritized by what is important. Then when we have this kind of list, we can talk about how are we going to to test these cases. And that part is the test design. We can decide that we're going to test everything through, I'm using Playwright today, so everything through Playwright. Or maybe we can write other tests. Maybe let's look at the database, for example, or the locality of things. Everything is here on my computer, and therefore, if I showed you like this architecture, and this is all I told you about my application. It's a client-server application with a database, and without the tidbit that everything runs locally here, you'll say, well, some of the cases that I need to check that are working, or are working as expected, is a connection to the database, or timing issues, concurrency, stuff like that. Everything that we think about, like multiple users scenario. But once I tell you that everything runs on my computer, there's not going to be a disconnect. There's probably not going to be any timeouts. Setting up a test that checks what happens for timeouts, it becomes even more complex than in regular application, but let's keep that. So knowing how things are built, how things work, gives us an idea in terms of how we're going to test them. If there was, for example, if everything was running on separate machines, I would probably need to do things like with the data. For each test, automated test, I probably need to reset the data, load the data prior to the test, things like that. This falls into the test design part. So once we decided to say, these are the things that we're going to go through, we need to think how we're going to test them. And if I'm calling another API, I'll need to take care of it somehow. I'll either need to set up the server to give me an answer when the test runs, or I need to mock it, but this is going to be part of the design of the test. So we have a plan, different cases that we'll go through in a minute. And then we have to say, what kind of test do we need? Some of them are going to be unit tests. Some of them are going to be component tests, as we're going to see. Some of them are going to be like web test. This is what we thought about when we started this session, the image that we have in our mind. So everyone has seen this kind of sort of pyramid before, I'm guessing. This is not coming with spiders, unfortunately, or Spider-Men, or Spider-Women, unfortunately, only with tests. A few words about this, though, even though everybody knows about test pyramid. This is a pyramid, its shape, because of cost. Unit tests are easier to run, cheaper to run, faster to run, cheaper to set up than all things on the top. It's not a pyramid of value. This is important because even if I had like a million of unit tests and none of the UI stuff that goes end to end, we probably wouldn't be that confident in releasing it. It's cheaper to have these little tests, and in the long run, I believe that it actually works in your favor to have them, but this is a cost pyramid. There's another thing that we don't talk about, but kind of relates to this kind of pyramid, is the isolation level. And in unit test, obviously, what we're testing, like pieces of code, that means that when we're testing something, it doesn't talk to the outside world, and therefore we don't need to set up all these services or mock services. And if we do, it's going to be a bit more expensive than setting up a mock for function. And one more thing about the UI part. We kind of think about UI as an end-to-end thing, but it doesn't really have to be. It has to be. It can be like end-to-end, or it can be front-end to back-end to mock service, or a mock database. It could be all kinds of options that we can select, but we put them in the bucket of UI. So this is more about communication. We're talking about people talking about, yeah, we have an UI test or web test. It may not mean what you think they mean. Unit test kind of, everybody sort of understands the limits, the boundaries of that. OK, so yeah, that's good. So what we're going to do is I'm going to basically I'm going to talk about something that is going to help me test better. So I talked about test plan and test design. Test design is how I'm going to test. So what is test better? Turns out, and we throw this term around very loosely, there's something called testability. Now, we usually think about testability as like an inherent attribute of the code or the system. And that's not true. We can write code that is more testable than other. Usually testability is not an on-off thing. Everything's testable depending on how much time you've got, the tools that you have, and most important, the motivation that you have to test it, or your boss's motivation. So everything's going to be testable, but going back to the pyramid, it's going to cost us. Now, I actually structured the code in a certain way to help me test it. Let me show you that. So there's this error that appears here. I told you that it's part of the React component, which it is. However, the validation bit, this is hidden. The validation bit sits here. So this code, the validation, which checks that everything is not empty and the email looks like an email, that's the regular expression here, I put it in a separate class. Now, I could have put it inside the React component here, the registration, but then I will have to test things together. And that's not a big problem, but it's going to be slower, and it's going to probably need to set up things that I didn't need to. I could test validation through the UI, the Playwright test. Again, everything. But again, it's going to be slower. It's going to be expensive. Maybe fall or fail on things that I didn't expect, because I want to concentrate on this. So moving code around, refactoring, actually helps me gives me options. I can select to unit test this thing rather than run through this component. Another choice that I did in terms of testability is that my choice again, that this component, as I told you, does all the user level interaction, and it interacts with the containing page. When you do the register, it sends an event. Where is that? Yeah, right here. Sets the event to the page, with the details and the promotions, but it doesn't call the API by itself. If you want to do that, to see that, you'll have to look at the page itself, which does the submit here, calling the API, the register API, to save the data. Where does the code of the API sit, or calling the API? It could sit in the component, it could sit in the page, but by selecting where it's going to be, I gave myself options. Now I can do like a component test for the React component, which is cheaper than checking the entire page. Cheaper in time, stuff like that, with the things that we didn't talk about. So we can, by deciding how to design our code, really impact the stability. And it's not like we're closing doors. It's more like opening them. We're giving ourselves, as developers or as testers, it doesn't matter, working together at the same team, options of how to test things. So again, going back to the web testing stuff, it does have different levels of things. So yeah, let's just talk about what is the web testing that we have in our mind, the thing that we do with Playwright or Selenium, and how it's different than component testing, just to get everyone on the level. So web testing is, well, which one? I have the component first. So, okay, so my example is in React, but everything that you're using today to write web code really is componentized. It could be React, it could be like Angular, whatever framework that you're using. And this is a kind of a new idea in web, like of the last few years in software. Componentizing things have been around from the 80s. Whenever we had the first class, that meant something. And there's a reason we like doing components. It makes sense in terms of code. Code that handles things sits in one place. But it's more about the isolation. Now, how does this thing work? We have a test framework. In my case, I'm using vtest. You can use whatever test framework that you want. And our component is something that renders itself into HTML and JavaScript, obviously. But it is only there in build time. Once you pass build time in production, you won't see that component in the code. So the idea is that we take this component that really translates into partial HTML, and we need to give it a container, otherwise it won't render. So when we're testing this, we're kind of testing inside something that we call a test bed. Now, in Angular testing, it actually is called a test bed, but it's mainly a container. And this container does two things. It renders the HTML and JavaScript for this component that we're giving it, and isolates this component from everything in the world. So imagine that you have like a whole page with all kinds of things on it, and you want to test one component that's on it. In regular web application, that you need to load everything, set up everything for all these things to load just to get to your component. In component testing, we're kind of squishing everything to focusing just on our component. And we need to supply whatever the component needs. Now, my component doesn't need anything. But if it were talking to an API, I will need to supply whatever it requires in terms of mocking or real behavior. So this is how component testing works. I'm going to show you examples in React testing library. This is how web test that we have in our mind works. It's a lot heavier. Machinery is a lot heavier because we have a test framework. I'm using Playwright. But if you wrote things with Selenium, for example, you'll have a test runner that operates Selenium, because Selenium is really running drivers which talk to browsers, which then load the HTML and JavaScript, and you don't know what happens on the backend, because that's like complete mystery. It's also true for the component if it talks to other things, but if it doesn't, the whole world becomes the component, which becomes easier to test. So when we're talking about web tests, it could be like a combination of or options of all things that happens behind the server, but you need a whole application, a whole page to load. Otherwise, nothing will be loaded that you can operate on. Different frameworks work in different ways, but all of them have this kind of structure, which, like I said, suffers, or let's talk about the suffering first. It is complex. It can fail on different connection points. It is heavy. It is slow. You actually feel the slowness. It's not like if you run the component test that I have with the unit test, you won't see any difference. Although a rendering takes place, here you do. So that goes back to the pyramid. We need to understand the cost of different things. But like I said before, what we consider a web test really can go in different ways depending on what the server looks like. And if we're just talking about scale, a web application is a lot bigger than a web component, and therefore probably in most cases will require a bigger setup. Bigger setup means it just becomes more expensive, slower, can fail on different points. So yeah, if we can do things in component level rather than on page level, that would be great. But remember, we don't get the same value from smaller tests. We don't get the same confidence from smaller tests. So we need to balance things out. So we have an idea of what web tests and component tests are. Let's take a look at what I did. And it's not like this is how you should do it. This is how I did it. But there is some kind of logic behind it. We'll talk about that in the end. So for the validation part, let's look at the validator. Just JavaScript or TypeScript can run anywhere, doesn't have any dependencies. So obviously a unit test will help here. I wrote a couple of them for validation. Some of them, the cool thing about the unit test, though, is that I can check. This is what the component call, or the page calls. No, the component before it sends the event. So this is a primary function. It checks that every field is empty. Let me squeeze this here. You already know about this. So everything is not empty, and the email is not invalid. And if there's an error, it will throw an error, and we want to check that in the tests. So a couple of tests that I can check. Is empty. I can throw different types of cases on it and see what the result is. Same thing for email validation to see all kinds of things. And before I move forward, each one of these cases that I can write in a single test here, if I did it through the web app in Playwright, this would require starting over all the time or continuing from something, which will create not so clear tests, stuff like that. So there's a good reason for me to structure the code like that, and then the test reflect that I can test just those small things. So these two, the final two check that if all valid information is passed, everything's OK, no exceptions thrown, no errors thrown. This is how we do it with the try catch here. If everything's OK, excellent, there's no failure. Otherwise, if there was an error, that's a failure because we didn't expect it. And finally, that something throws. So like small tests, unit test, excellent. Now let's talk about the component here. We're moving to the component level. Remember, the component doesn't save the data. It does say invoke an event when I'm clicking the register if everything's valid. So what kind of things can I check there? All kinds of behavior. I decided to split that into two things. The first one is a startup. What happens on a startup? I'm sorry for the squiggly lines. It's a TypeScript things. I assure you everything is run. I actually ran them before we started. So how does it work? Render is part of React testing library. It does exactly what you need. You give it some kind of React code, JSX code, and the component. It will render itself. And you have to pass, by my design, something that will get invoked when it's ready to invoke. But first of all, I split it into startup and actual behavior. Why? Test organization is very important. It makes sense to see what kind of things we're testing together and how to separate other stuff. And also makes sense in terms of where will I put the next test that I will try to add. So splitting test makes them a lot more readable and helps us make sense of the system. So on startup, I'm expecting the first, last name, and email to be empty. This is like, if you've seen Playwright or Selenium, it can look similar in terms of what it gives you. Basically, I'm checking that everything is empty here. Checkboxes are checked correctly. And on startup, I'm expecting this one to be checked, this one not to be checked. This is not to be checked. And the register button is disabled, obviously. So yeah, I can check that on the Playwright level, which I'll show you some of them. But I don't have to check everything there. Again, this requires more time or running time. I'd rather do it where it's possible, it's nearer to where I want, and easier to debug also. Because these things I can debug, and they are running in process, both unit test and component tests. So I actually can put breakpoint more easily than if I were debugging a whole process from the outside. OK, so these are the startup things, the behavior things. Let's look at those. So this is a bit more complex because we're trying to get all kinds of behaviors here. Should enable the register button after checking the terms checkbox. This one. And should disable the register after unchecking it, which you just saw. Interesting thing here. Think about it. Notice that I just show you exactly what it needs to be disabled, right? I click this, and then I re-clicked it again, which made it disabled. You need to know this. And this is something that we have a problem with in component tests. And when we're in web application tests, it even become a lot more complex, connecting ideas to elements on the page. Because the idea of this needs to be disabled because I didn't check the thing, this is like a business requirement. It's not a component requirement. And when we read this test, and sometimes when we read web application test, like the whole page, we'll see these things, and we'll assume that when we're reading this, we'll understand the connection between these elements. It's not always completely true. This is the only, apart from my oral explanation, this is the kind of things that explain the connection. Kind of missed them. So it displays the errors, and this is something that can be very complex if you want to try to check all the cases here. So I'm just, another thing that we need to do in order to check the error, I need to check this thing. So I enable this, and therefore only then I can check for the errors. So this that starts to appear everywhere, I need to check the term box, is part of the tests, but we don't really connect to that when this thing will fail in 3 months, and we will not remember that. So checking that it's there, you can actually check that if it's important, it's going to be like in red. You decide what to test, of course. Hiding the errors, I didn't show you that if you try to do this, and you want to make this go away, you have to type something. This is something else that I want to check. So small behaviors that I can do at the lower level, but this is the lowest level I can do that. So this is getting checked here. And the final thing is that, remember that I said that if everything works, register sends an event to the container that everything is OK. So I need to set these things up and check that it got the message OK, the container, because the page doesn't play here. It's not part of our world. So this is what you'll see, event handlers and mocks and stuff like that to check that everything was OK. And this, by the way, will not be possible from the web level, because the events will look completely different. Like I said, components are there at built-in, not at runtime. So scripts will look differently. Events will not be easier to comprehend. Things will happen that the React does for me. So I can do things and check these things at a different level if I thought about it. So these are my component tests. If I look at my web tests, like I said, Playwright. So first of all, let's talk about the thank you page. Remember, I told you that it is past the query parameter and shows a thank you, Gil, if it got it, and who are you if it didn't. So I can check those as well. This kind of behavior, it's not a unit test, because I test it with the whole page. It navigates to the thank you page, sometimes with the parameters, sometimes without. But I don't need to go through the entire registration page. So I need to think about what do I need to check and how I do that. And once I decided, well, this is part of the page, there's no component here, I need to do it through Playwright on my web tests. But I don't need to go through the entire registration process just to check that the thank you page works. I can do this at the thank you page level. So this is, if you think about it, like going down our pyramid level, it's still a UI test, but it's a smaller piece. Now, I have redundancy, really, because if this one fails and the whole registration part works, I know there's something in between that happens. OK, so these are the thank you page. I have the registration spec here, which checks that the registration page opens correctly. Note that some of these things are already done at the component level. Nobody assures me that the way the component loads is the way that the page loads. I wrote both, so I know it does. So I can do this. I put everything in a common here, finding all the locators so you can actually read the test, and you can read them too. I actually did a whole webinar recently about clean tests, clean web tests. You can actually check that on my YouTube channel, and you can actually read that and understand a bit more. But this one goes to the registration page. Make sure the title is visible, the promotion checkbox is checked, and the button is disabled. Why is that? Well, some of them are already checked, but these are really I translated my requirements for the application, the business level application. What are the business rules that I want to make sure that at least are there? I want a title, which was not tested as a component. And in terms of this content, I want to make sure that it loads up with, I want to get the promotions, and I can't really register without it. That's like a subset of the things that I A, tested at the component level, and B, some of them was not at the component level. I want to make sure that it actually works. I decided to write a test because for the error, and I can balance that with the component level. So this looks that checks for the error message to be there if an error appears. And finally, there's the registration process, the full registration, which navigates, checks the checkbox, fills in the data fields, clicks the button, and then makes sure that after the thank you page loads, the thank you Gil is displayed. And then we go back to our question from before, does it really work? Because, like we said before, does it really work requires us to say what is important for us, and therefore I need to define that the data was saved. Now, I showed you the API before. There's a register API that saves the data to the database. If it was the only thing that was available, we'll be kind of in a conundrum because we wanted to check that the data is there. I showed you the data. We actually went into the database, the file. I know it wasn't that complex. It wasn't like Indiana Jones thing. But we looked at the data, and we can check that it is OK. Sometimes we don't have access to the data. In my case, I actually set up one more thing so I can test it. So I created an all database, an all API, sorry, that my test can call. So this one, basically, if you look at the code, it just brings everything that's in the database. And my more robust test does all the things that appeared in the UI test before, but then it calls the API all data, gets the JSON, looks for the last entry, and sees if it's the same thing that we entered. Correlates to the operations that we did here. And this is a more complete test. But now our web test includes also calling APIs. And if there wasn't an API, we'll need to find some way to make sure that what is important for us not only appears on the screen, but the data is actually there. So it's data, it's state changes, whatever it is. Even if it's not on the screen, we want some access to that. And web tests do include that as well. So what is web testing? And the answer is very simple, but very big. Web testing is really testing, but it comes in the context of web applications. Think about all the things that we went through. And we went through a lot of things here. We talked about, first of all, the tools. Yeah, we can't get away with them. We all have all kinds of tools. I worked with Playwright and Vitest and Next.js. It doesn't matter. You need to know the tools. So obviously, when we think about web testing, automatically we think about tools. Yes, we need to think about tools. We need to understand tools, what they're used for. Let's put them aside. Let's talk about more things that we did. We talked about planning. What are the cases? What are the cases that are important? We talked about design. What kind of tests for each test case? Why is that work? What stands behind this logic of picking these things? We talked about test design also in the concept of how do I make this test pass? Because in the beginning, we talked about the importance of what is important in this application. In the end, I showed you how I managed to do that. And this is a design issue, the design of setting up an API so I can read the data, which my test can actually look at the data and say, well, this is OK, this is not OK. So test design is something that is part of testing. Understanding the architecture is something that we do in testing, because we consider things, how things are running, when they're running, what are the dependencies, what needs to set up, everything that how does it work is something that we think about in testing. We talked about test organization, where you put things, which kind of tests go together, which tests don't go together. If you've written a few tests like web versus like component or unit, don't put them together because A, isolation, but B, unit tests can run faster, component tests do run faster. If we put them all within one test file, things will run slower. Things will impact each other. This is like a very stupid application, but most applications have dependency within them. Not about, we talk about fragile testers because the tests put some kind of dependency between the tests. No, it's inside application. So how we run things really is important for us because we want to run these things. And test organization helps us do this and run only the things that we want when we want them. Obviously, refactoring, moving code around, I showed you the end result of what I did, but it wasn't like that all the time. Helping the ability of refactoring, moving code, not changing functionality, refactoring is part of what makes testing easier or complex, depending on which side of the force you're coming from. I'm assuming that you want to test easier and cheaper, therefore, you can impact how things get tested. It goes also for debugging. Smaller things obviously are easier to debug and faster to debug. Test maintenance, if you want to explore stuff manually, even partial manually, you have to think about these things. So get me through the login and setting up the account of the 8 pages automatically. I will take it from there. And then I will do things manually. We have to think about these things. Why? Because this is like what we do when we're testing. We think about all these kind of things. So web testing really is all these things. So it is really everything that we do in testing, only with some tools. Some of them are new, some of them are different. And obviously, you can take this into mobile testing and stuff like that, but we're not talking about these things today. But there are options. This is what I want you to really, when you come off this talk, really, apart from, I'm going to ask you soon, how many Spider-Man have you seen? But other than that, it's not just automation. It's not just the tool that you're using. It's a whole set of skills that you do every day. And if you're not thinking about these things, I hope that you start thinking about this, because I mentioned the word options and cheap and stuff like that. These are like economic things. It really saves up our time. It saves a lot of despair and debugging time. Because if we take these things and we think about them, and we can apply these options, it will help us. It will help save more time for us, free us for testing other things that we would like to do, rather than reading logs. And that's what I wanted to share with you today. So, Paul, come back.
Yeah.
Questions.
Again, we didn't get a whole lot of questions out there, but there was a couple things that I saw. And I also see Testing and Tooling is chatting with us. And they've been here before, and I always love they ask questions and really give good insights. One of the things I mentioned was while you were doing the live demos, and by the way, I love watching a live demo. I'm a big fan of VS Code. This is the first time I've ever seen the browser actually embedded inside the IDE when you were doing the live. I was wondering, could you show us in VS Code, where is that cool little trick? Maybe it's just something I never came across.
So the application is running here. One of them, it's already running.
Okay.
And I think you go here to the command palette.
Okay.
And when you do that, you can write simple browser. It's just recently used it, so it's up there. Okay. So if you do that,
that's basically your application name that
you ask you for the address.
Fantastic.
Voila. And then what I did is like split it.
Fantastic. I have been I've played around. I think my book is on a key here. I'm doing some things. I'm sorry. Um, I played around with JetBrains with their IntelliJ. They have something called Aqua, which is essentially the same thing. It's an IDE, but specifically for test automation engineers. And the trick they do is the same thing. They embed the browser in there. So I love it. I didn't know that I have because I mostly work in VS Code. I do want to give a shout out to JetBrains because I like their idea as well. See, testing tools, give me a little shout out there. One other question I had is this this sample website. I always like to go test against sites and sandbox sites. I run one of my own called Candy Mapper. If anybody wants to check that out, have you considered putting this as a public site that you could just go and hit and support it somewhere outside where any of our
the project is on GitHub, so you can actually download and play with it. I can send you
let's jump to the link on GitHub. We'll share that out there.
But it's not like a site. It's like 2 pages, so there's not much to do with it.
Oh.
But people can download the project. And
can you bring up a browser and navigate to it? By the way, while you're doing that, everybody check out. Gil actually has a site and I believe a book out there called Everyday Unit Testing.
Yeah.
And his website is really easy to hit. It's www.everydayunittesting.com. I don't know how nobody grabbed that site already, but Gil, you're on top of that. That is fantastic. I'm actually looking at it right now, and there's some API information he's got out there, which is something I'm scrubbing up at the moment.
Yeah, if you go to my YouTube channel, which I need to link directly, a bit more easier to get there, you'll see all kinds of webinars. That the next webinar is coming up in 2 weeks, I think, and it's about Playwright in an hour. So if you don't know much about Playwright, so in 2 weeks, the Tuesday, we're going to have a webinar. Like I did one about Postman in an hour. It actually took a bit more than an hour. But
is it paid to get in that, or is that free? We can just sit and watch it.
Registration. You can do this through the site.
Perfect.
And I'm trying to log into GitHub, which is giving me some problem because I need authentication and stuff like that.
Well, if the guys will let me, I'm going to share my screen. I have the, let me do share screen over here. I think I've got it on screen 3, which of course is, no, I don't have it on screen 3. Hold on one second over here. I've got it on screen 1. I'm going to share this over here. And you guys can see mirror. We don't want that. This is Gil's site over here, Justin Gil.
So this is, I'm not sure. This is the site. Yeah, I'm now sharing the GitHub thing.
Oh, let me turn that off. We'll switch back over to you, Gil.
Yeah, I didn't make it public. It will be public in a few minutes. So it's called a Playwright Intro. It has the whole things that we discussed today, because it.
I'm not sure if you're sharing your screen. I think I stole the share from you.
Stop sharing and then restart sharing. How do you do that?
So I'm always happy to show off stuff that's going on there.
This one, share.
Oh, Julie says, thanks for sharing. I really like that it was practical. Want to challenge the idea of an API for end-to-end testing to make sure that data was stored correctly. Could not this be done at other test level?
Well, it's a very short question. Okay, so assuming that the data that you're interested in is behind an API, okay? Whenever you want to access the API, 2 things need to happen. First of all, someone needs to run this API, okay? And you need to set up the answer that you want for that specific test. So in my case, what I did was the only thing that talking to APIs is the website, and I complemented that with the test itself. It could be like in the React level, the component, if it actually did that, if the component would actually invoke an API, I could actually do that. So calling the API can be in different levels. It makes sense that you need to set up your both tests and the requests themselves and the data for them at the level that you think that make sense in terms of the test.
Okay. Yeah, well, I do agree with you. I mean, you can do it at different levels, integration level and also an end-to-end highest level from testing. I've always saved unit testing is for the developers. Me as an automation engineer, I'm kind of at just the integration and the unit integration and the end-to-end higher level testing. But this is great information. This is actually the first time I had the chance to sit down and someone give a really in-depth talk about unit testing. And I loved it. We also have another question over here. Gil, do you have a YouTube channel?
I do.
Can you share that link? And again, if you share the screen, and I'll go pick up the link and I'll throw it over here. I did a little search while you were talking over there. Is it Gil Automations? Is that?
It's not that easy.
Or no, it's not that easy. Okie doke.
I'm trying to take you there.
Sure.
So it's.
By the way, if you want to see some other stuff, I also have a YouTube channel. It is Paul Grossman, the Dark Arts Wizard. I had to put all those words in there just to make it more complex. Yeah, Gil, what's your link there?
It's youtube.com/testinggil. So at testinggil. I'm sharing it right now. I'm not sure if you can see it.
I don't see it on our screen yet. Can I ask our guys in the control booth? Can you see if you can bring up Gil's screen if it's sharing? Let me see if there's any chat going on here. We only do have about a minute or so left, and I do want to make sure that Testing and Tooling gets your site. Testing and Tooling, you guys could also reach out to me or Gil. I'm at I'm at thedarkartswizard@gmail.com if you want to reach out to me and talk to me about test automation. That's make sure it's the Dark Arts Wizard. Dark Arts Wizard at Gmail is somebody else. I don't know what they'll say to you. Let's see. I got it. We have it here. Gil has shared it over here. Thank you, Gil. Testing Gil. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to go share my screen real quick, and then we're going to wrap this up. I want to thank everybody and my two guests out here for joining us. Gil, it has been a pleasure to have you out with us. We also had Solar Cell out there at Ethicode. Oh, by the way, do you work for a company? Any company you want to
work for myself? I really recommend me.
I like that. Give me 1 second. I will have. This is not really. Oh, really? Put a password out there. That's nice, Paul. Gee, I guess I'll have to change that very quickly, won't I? 1 second here. We will jump over to Gil's, and then we are going to wrap this up. Again, I want to thank everybody for joining us here. Here's Gil's website on YouTube. You can go and check out all of his cool videos out here. And he's, we've actually got a few other people. We got Angie Jones out there, who's awesome. I'm going to have to give her a call one of these days, an Evil Tester. Those guys are all awesome over there.
Yes.
I'm going to go back over here, Gil, again. And I'm going to stop sharing because I got this. This is going to be annoying.
Yeah.
Or any place that we can reach you, that if anybody wants to reach out and talk to you.
So testinggil.com or everydayunittesting.com will get to me. Gil at testinggil.com. It's the easier way. Social media, whatever, LinkedIn, get in touch with me. I'm still on Twitter somehow. And anyway.
Right. Sounds good. Well, everybody, I'm going to put on my testing mask again and go off and do some cool stuff. It's been a blast. We'll see everybody, I think, next month or in 2 months. And my co-author, just a reminder, my co-author Larry Goddard will be hosting the next channel. Larry Goddard and I wrote this book on test automation. I've mentioned it 3 times. And also, don't forget, we also have Matthew Hughes, who's also a good friend of mine, Software Testing Strategies. Please check these books out. Get a chance to take a look at them. And with that, I will say goodbye. Thank you again, Gil. Everybody have a great day.